Hi, everyone. Welcome to Figuring Out Fabric, where I ask dumb questions and you get smart answers. And I'm really happy to have Evelyn here. I've known her since she was what, teenager, little kid? When was your first like tween?
Like 13,
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, so she's been involved with the data community before she could drink or drive or any of that kind of stuff. Um, and she is a BI developer. And one of the interesting things is she's certified in both Power BI and Tableau, which provides kind of an interesting perspective. But for her, a lot of this stuff is still new. And so I was really interested to get some perspective on that because if you go on the Power BI subreddit, there's people always asking about the PL-300. And one of the biggest challenges as an expert, as an educator, is trying to keep that beginner mind and remember what it was like starting out. And even then, I know when I started out, like it was a totally different landscape. Like there was one book by like Teal Lechev, barely any blog posts, and you just kind of had to scrounge around. Um, so tell us, how did you get started with data and business intelligence and all that stuff? How did you decide you wanted to do that as a career?
I really got into business intelligence and specifically I'd say like data visualization or report building. Because it was sort of an intersection between the two different career paths I was considering. I knew I either wanted to go into IT or I wanted to go into art or something like graphic design. And BI and data viz kind of fit perfectly in the middle there. There's a technical component to it, but then there's also a sort of creative outlet in there as well that I really enjoy.
Did you did you find it difficult to mesh the two of those? Because, I mean, you can argue how much art or science IT is, but certainly on the viz side, there's a lot more art, and then, with reporting that kind of stuff, it gets a lot more technical and hands-on. But all throughout, you're having to make these kinds of judgment calls. So did it feel like it was two totally different worlds, the whole like left brain, right brain kind of thing, or did it overlap pretty well for you?
No, I think it felt pretty intuitive, just the way the two are linked. And I think when I was in college getting my IT degree, being able to use multiple different data viz tools like Power BI, like Tableau, Excel. I did a tiny, tiny bit of Python. I'd say each of those tools can sometimes lean more towards the technical side or more towards the creative side. So getting to use a variety of different tools and platforms to learn about BI basics and learn about visualization basics kind of helped level those two out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're more of a polyglot or a multilingual kind of speaker of that kind of stuff, and it helps avoid the fact that a lot of these tools can be very opinionated in the way that you do things. And for
Mhm.
me, I did a little bit of Excel, but Power BI has been my main BI tool. And there's so many times where I'm like, well, this is just the way things work. And then you look over at Tableau and it's like, oh, if you have a pie chart, you can have it so that if you have more than like three or four categories, the rest just go into other or something like that.
Mhm.
You have these like little quality of life features that you just take for granted, you may not think are an option or something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
One of the other things I will say that I think having graphic design experience prepares you for with IT or with, I'm sorry, with business intelligence is business intelligence is awful because of scope creep and the customers never know what they want. Like
Mhm.
you'll be like, what do you want? And they say faster horses. And then you realize they wanted a car. And so, you know,
I like
I've done software development. I've done various like IT, like server projects and stuff. And business intelligence is probably the only area where I will build what the customer told me to build. And then upon seeing it, realizes they want something completely different. Like they'll ask you
yeah.
for a helicopter and you'll be like, here's a helicopter. And they're like, well, this seems like a bad way to get groceries. And it's like, well, maybe if you told me the use case to begin with, but a lot of times they don't even know. right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and that can be something that you find out and you work towards over the course of development. Sometimes it takes a couple cycles to get there.
yeah, I think some of the things that you learn to do is like, okay, how can we sanity check this as soon as possible? How can we move it further up? And so if you can do wireframes or mock-ups or napkin drawings, that can help a lot. Um, so so how did you end up getting certified in both Tableau and Power BI? Because I would assume your employer would only care about one. So did you
Yeah,
start with one and then pivot, or how did that?
I actually started with Tableau before I started with Power BI, which
Yeah.
seems a little bit backwards, since, Power BI is free for a lot of core features and Tableau is the exact opposite.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But a lot of my business intelligence and IT courses that I took in college, I went to Columbus State, had Tableau licenses for Tableau Desktop. Got to do a
Right.
little bit of work with Tableau Prep or Tableau Prep Builder, just Tableau Prep, the data transformation tool for Tableau, and then some online learning paths as well. And I think starting with Tableau, it had its benefits because I mean, I get access to one of the more difficult tools to get access to since it's really just meant for enterprise scale. You can't really buy like an individual Tableau license. And the way Tableau's set up, it's very focused on, like you don't just have a whole list of fields, you specifically have your measures and you have your dimensions. So you have your
Right.
categorical data and your numeric data. And then you very specifically map those to different types of aesthetics, like size, like shape, like color, like text. And it was one of those, it took me a little bit to get used to, that mindset. But once I did, I found it very easy to get used to developing the different charts themselves. I think it's slightly more intuitive than Power BI when you're just getting started. Um, but I was also able to do a little bit of Power BI when I was in college. But then I mainly started using that for my current role in government that I'm in right now.
Yeah, I mean, so you said you touched on Python. Did you ever do anything with ggplot or anything like that?
I don't believe so. It was for more of a programming class than like a data viz class. So,
Yeah, the reason I ask is ggplot stands for grammar of graphics, where the idea is that you can have these fundamental, like a visualization grammar, and it's kind of the basics of um all these elements. And so you can kind of build things up from scratch the same way that a sentence might be built up from you've got nouns and verbs and all this kind of stuff. And so it's not exactly the same, but the way you're describing Tableau is interesting because it sounds like the pieces are a little bit more interchangeable.
mhm.
Um, and I don't know if you've ever looked into Deneb for Power BI, but it also works off of the whole idea of a visualization grammar and all that kind of stuff. So that's interesting
To
though.
look into both of those.
Yeah. Yeah. ggplot makes more sense if you're heavily using like R and Python, I believe. Deneb, folks do use that in order to what is it? Just get around a lot of the limitations of Power BI visualizations and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm. No, those both sound interesting.
So what was your motivation? Oh, good.
No, I was just gonna say I completely skipped over the certification part of your question.
No, 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 it's all good.
Um, the Tableau certification was actually a optional assignment for one of my BI classes in college. It was not paid for. I had to pay for it out of pocket. but it was one of those you can take the final exam or you can get your Tableau desktop specialist certification. And any opportunity to skip an exam, I'm always like, I'm gonna go for that. Even if I ended up doing more work, probably getting the
Yeah.
Tableau cert than the actual
Yeah.
test. But um yeah, I got my Tableau desktop certification, finishing up my degree, and then my Power BI cert I got more recently since I'm doing a lot more work with Power BI in my current role.
So was the decision to get the certification kind of a self-motivated one to kind of have a learning plan and a concrete target, or did your employer be like, "Hey, you should really get this"? Like, what was the driving factor?
It was self-motivated, I'd say. There are options for Power BI and Tableau churning. My organization uses both. Tableau for a lot of the yeah, Tableau for a lot of the public facing enterprise reporting that we do, and then Power BI for a lot of the smaller scale internal stuff. Um,
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, no comment as to the validity of that strategy. I don't know enough to comment,
Well, I
but
mean, I think I get it because Power BI, whether we like it or not, is optimized for like viral growth. I sometimes joke it's designed for shadow BI, shadow IT, where someone can just with the credit card can get a few licenses, can spin up, a workspace and start making some reports. And so I can see how people might say, okay, well, we're going to use it for like these one-off things or these small scale kind of things. And for more rigorous stuff, we might use Tableau. I mean, certainly if visualization quality is a big deal, Tableau was the gold standard for a number of years.
mhm.
Um, Ever since Salesforce bought them, I don't know how well they've been doing, but I have a feeling they've probably stagnated a little bit. Um,
Gotcha.
but hard to say. I've never had to work with Tableau personally, so I can't speak to it too much.
Yeah, I do prefer it from a visualization standpoint. I think it's much more robust. I think the conditional formatting options are far beyond
Oh
what you
yeah,
can
no,
do
we've
in Power.
we've had that same conditional formatting dialogue for a decade, and
Oof,
as far as I'm aware, it's not anywhere on the immediate roadmap. Like
which
it's
is
certainly they'd love to improve it. Um, but I think that um, the Rui's work with the core visuals and that plan is a big focus. People are screaming for updates to table and matrices visuals, and
mm,
they're aware of that. So there's some improvements in certain areas, but yeah, I don't expect the conditional formatting dialogue to get improved anytime soon. And it's funny because like we talked about, I think that's a benefit to you, the fact that like you've seen whether the grass is greener or browner on the other side. And I think for me, sometimes there's a little bit of learned helplessness where I'm like, well, this is just what I have, so I'm just going to make it work, right?
yeah.
Although certainly I have done a lot of conditional formatting in Excel, so I know how it can be a little bit better. But there's plenty of stuff where like I'm not a data viz guy. Like I accidented my way into all of this, and I keep telling people I feel like data visualization is my weakest area. Like I went into IT because I'm not good with people, and I like computers and I like code, and code compiles. Meanwhile, like if I make a joke, I'll get some sort of feedback message, but it does English doesn't compile. And one of the things that's hard is social consequences are delayed, right? If I do some ETL, I can look at the data immediately and tell if it's right or wrong. I can validate it. If I make a visualization, I can kind of see if it looks kind of right, but whether people actually like it or use it is delayed. And whether I say something dumb and make a jerk of myself, delayed consequences may never find out. And so I went into IT because I was much better with computers. And then I kind of learned the hard way that the business intelligence means that you need to actually understand the business and you have to talk to everyone in the business and you have to have people skills.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a bait and switch for me. I don't know about you. You seem to be someone who has maybe more emotional intelligence than I did at your age. That's for sure.
I do my best. Yeah. I enjoy. parts of BI like the requirements gathering process and
Yeah, yeah.
getting continual feedback from people. Well, because I think it's really satisfying when you can help, someone, like you said, earlier, sometimes people, you'll present them with one proof of concept and it turns out they want something completely different.
Right.
Sometimes just helping people figure out how to articulate the requirements and the aspects that they're looking for and figuring out how to put that in language that's understood by the whole group that you're working with.
Yeah, you basically have to be a therapist for the data, right? And like what they want is deep within inside them, and you have to kind of like just pull it out. And yeah, sometimes it feels like the proof of concept is like this Rorschach test. And it's like, what do you see? And sometimes it's a butterfly and you're like, sweet. And sometimes, it's a fire hydrant and you're like, oh, we're way off the mark.
I like that
Metaphorically.
analogy. I like that. It is kind of like a
Well, that's the
Rorschach.
thing. It's like, yeah, well, you just like, it's like, what does this look like to you? Because like I can tell you as you progress in your career, like a decade from now, you'll start to develop more of an intuition for this, especially as you understand how businesses work. Um, but there's still a lot of times where like the customer is surprised and they didn't realize what they needed or wanted. Like the worst is when you're doing a migration, because what happens is you're like, hey, I need you to validate this logic. So I tried to copy it exactly from the Excel. Do the numbers look right? Is this making sense? And inevitably, out of like the 12 measures, there'll be one where they're like, I don't think we actually use that anymore. Um, and you just drop it or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of these surprises, and it's so much as trying to help give people vocabulary. Like this is like when I try to go get a haircut. I don't understand any of the words. So I learned last month that the haircut I like is called a hard part, where it's a little bit longer on the top and then shorter on the sides. But like I never have the vocabulary. As a 36-year-old adult, you'd think I would know how to do this. And I'm just like uh longer on the top, short on the bottom, halfway up on the ears. And they'll be like, all right, do you want to use scissors or a shaver? And I'm like, what do you think? And like and I can tell them the general need. Like I don't use, we're probably delving way too much in my personal life, but I don't use like any gel or anything like that. And I'm like, just make it look business professional. And so, I think that's probably how it is for a lot of people, where like they know what they like or they know what they're used to, but they just don't have the words to convey it. And so sometimes what you have to do is you have to take the words that they give you, apply some of your own intuition of how the business works or what the business need is, or even ask a few extra questions, and then come back and be like, all right, do you want this? And then they're like, no, that's a mullet, please no, or whatever. So that's kind of where I think a lot of that art comes in, is you really do need a strong emotional intelligence for business intelligence. And I certainly did not go into IT because of strong emotional intelligence. So.
Yeah, it's a definite learning curve. Especially if you're like I'm in vendor management right now, and this is my first, job in a, field that's specific. So there's language on my end that I have to learn
Right.
as far as terminology surrounding, the procurement process and third-party relationships and all that. And then there's also, concepts on my side, the BI concepts that I need to communicate to, the users that I'm working with that I'm trying to design for. So it's really a two-way street, but once you can settle into it, it gets easier.
Yeah. Um, so talking about the PL-300 cert, since I know a lot of people are going to be interested, what was your learning strategy? What was the process? How did that go for you overall?
Um, I mean, I passed it on my first try,
Oh,
so
nice.
happy about that. I'd say it went well. It was my first Microsoft certification. I haven't done any other Microsoft certs. I thought it was pretty straightforward. I think for the PL-300, as long as you've got a copy of Power BI that you can, play around with and you have time to dedicate to the Microsoft learning paths, I think it's very doable. I know I was a big syllabus person in college. I always made sure I had all the syllabi
Yeah.
for my classes on hand throughout the entire semester. And most of the exams, including the Power BI one, have a syllabus or a list of core concepts and topics covered in the exam. So I know what I did is I went through the syllabus and I color coded everything based on my level of confidence with
Yeah.
the topic listed. So whether I have a high level of confidence, this is something I do every day at my current job. Mid-level, I'm familiar with it, but it may not be my strong suit. Or, low level, I've never used this before in my life. I have no idea what it is. And then I just sort of worked with the concepts I had the weakest understanding of and went from there. That way I could kind of prioritize my time a little bit more, making sure I'm not, spending hours going over material I'm already pretty comfortable with.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I guess a question to that is, you know, so the learn path is pretty hands-on. Over the past decade, in my experiences, the exam technology has gone there. It seems like they've moved away from just raw multiple choice, just raw case studies, but more towards having like, okay, here's the UI, and you have to pick the right thing. Um,
yeah, there's a demo or like a lab aspect to it as
yeah.
well.
And so I guess my question for you is, in the past, some of these certs, if you just read the cert prep, you could pass. But I get the feeling today you need to put your hands on the product. So do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, I,
Okay.
I definitely agree with that. I think you need to have an understanding of the UI going in, at least the three main different views, model, tabular, and then report view, being able to navigate through those to an extent.
Okay. Because I think some people may underestimate that. Um, it was funny. I was proctoring a workshop for Ginger Grant, and as I was running on trying to answer questions, and it made me feel like a genius and an idiot at the same time because of the UI stuff. Because people would ask me like, okay, in Fabric, what's the underlying storage situation for Fabric Data Warehouse? And I could explain that very intelligently. And then someone else would be like, hey, my data pipeline failed. Where do I see the activity log? And I'd be like, I clicked the bell. I don't know. And so it's interesting how hard that is when you're not using it daily to
Yeah.
understand the UI for some of this stuff, especially for Fabric. A lot of it's new for people.
hmm
You know.
Yeah, and I'd go even further to say, and I don't think this is 100% like a deal breaker, like you're gonna fail if you don't know this exact terminology. But again, knowing the language for the UI, what different sections are explicitly called. Like, okay, is this the ribbon? Is this a tab within the ribbon? Is this a group within the ribbon? Because sometimes it'll explain something in text format, and I'd be able to, you know, understand if it was a visual walkthrough. But when they're referring to how to navigate to an area in Power BI just through text, it can take me a minute.
Yeah, I've run into that with if I'm writing any documentation, be like, well, what do I call this thing? And there's names for stuff that I don't even think of, like the values well. Like I imagine a well filled with water, but um, so I that makes sense that it can be very hard to be like, well, what's the data pane exactly?
Yeah. Yeah, when they're like, okay, where do you find this specific? Because there are some questions that are solely about the UI. It's like, where do you go to, do this transformation or to
Yeah.
create a measure or something like that? And you have to know what each of those sections are called. So, no, that's a
It's
good point to
it's
bring
a
up.
very UI heavy product. And then the other one of the other issues, I don't know if this came up or not, but for a lot of things, there's two or three places to do it,
hmm
right? So like you need to make a new measure. Well, I always go to the data pane on the side and I right click on the table and I do new measure, but there's a thing on the ribbon. There's probably a third space somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's always funny watching people give a workshop because you're like, oh, I didn't even know that button existed.
hmm
So,
Thankfully, when I took it, there weren't that many questions like that. There were several when I took my Tableau exam. It was like, all right, how do you want to, add some sort of, conditional formatting. You want to do it the easy way, the kind of hard way, or the, way where you have to navigate through 20 different menus and nobody's ever used it. I'm like, the
Yeah.
easy way.
No, that makes sense. Um, yeah, so we got another about 5 minutes here. So it sounds like you were one of the lucky ones where college hopefully did a good job of either preparing you for your job or at least was aligned with it, right?
Yeah,
Um,
very, very lucky in that regard.
yeah, because there's a lot of folks in IT that kind of just like came in through some weird lateral sort of way. Um, Honestly, at least when I was going to school, there weren't a lot of data oriented programs out there. Like I took a course or two on database design, but like there wasn't anything to be like a database administrator that I
Yeah.
saw easily, right? And maybe that's changed some. Um, so since you were fortunate that like there was this alignment between your education and your work, what was the biggest challenge or surprise for you when you did kind of enter the workforce and start applying this stuff?
I'd say the biggest challenge from a data perspective would just be the size of the information you're working with and the
Mm.
quality of the information. Well, definitely the quality is,
Sorry, that was a knowing laugh.
well, it's when you do, like practice labs or something in
Oh
school, it's
yeah,
like, oh,
no,
hey, we're gonna practice data
clean.
transformation. Well, it'll be clean, and then there will be one name and like a first name column that's like slightly misspelled, and it's like that'll be your example for how to address data quality, and then you enter like a large enterprise
Right. They're
organization.
they're using an Excel file like an art canvas, right? And so yeah,
Yeah.
it's not even in first normal form. Like they've got like three levels of headers that are just
Yeah.
decoration. Things aren't aligned, they skip rows, and you have to figure out, well, how do I get this into just first normal form? Not even like tabular kind of stuff, just like is the data in the cells in the
Yeah.
shape of a table?
That was my first couple months, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Right. And like it's not you're a data janitor at that point. And it's not exciting and it's a significant amount of the work. And like that's I get really annoyed by like LinkedIn grifters and all that kind of stuff. People that try to sell you on like, oh, become a data scientist or whatever. And what so many of them don't talk about is like the drudge work. Like
Yeah.
if you want to be a data scientist, 80% of your time is data cleansing. So you better get good at it.
Hmm.
Um, it's rough, and like it's rough at every company size because in theory, I haven't worked with a ton of large enterprises, but in theory, you're more likely to have a data warehouse or something like that. But you still have like these fractal park pockets of messy data, right?
Exactly.
Like there's the company approved data model, but then there's like Chris in accounting, and they're just getting by on Excel and Access and CSV files.
Hmm.
And it's just for their department or their purpose. So that's never going to make it back into like the mothership and the golden model. And so you never get away from it, even if there's supposed to be more maturity, so to speak.
Yeah, my favorite part of BI is definitely the data visualization part, but that's probably 10, maybe 15% of what I do most of the
Right.
time.
Yeah. No, I mean that makes total sense, right? And it's challenging for sure. All right. So let's wrap up with some questions. Here we go. So, I know you haven't necessarily done a ton with Fabric, so Power BI is part of Fabric, so you can answer it with Power BI stuff you want. But what's your favorite Power BI or Fabric feature?
Favorite feature. Can it be a
Yeah,
power
whether something that just saves you time. Yeah, Power that just
column
Power Query as a whole
properties?
or something specific.
Column properties in Power Query, being able to see like a snapshot of the distribution of the values, the number of unique values, the number of distinct.
Oh,
I
nice.
always have those turned on. I love being able to get like a basic understanding of a table if I'm looking at it for the first time, or if it's changed dramatically since I've last looked at it.
I think you're the first person I've seen talk about that, like from a personal usage perspective. And it makes sense. I'm just glad to see someone using that.
I really like them. I honestly can't imagine not having them turned on.
Yeah, yeah. In the past, you just scroll a bunch and like just get a gestalt kind of feeling.
Yeah. Well, and especially, well, you got to make sure you have, it's profiling the entire data set, not just the first 10,000 rows. If,
Yeah.
it's small enough that that'll work.
Yeah.
But
So what is your least favorite Power BI or Fabric feature?
least favorite feature in Power BI. I kind of want to say just the straight up text boxes in Power BI
Sure.
because they're so limited for no reason.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, it
For
makes
no
sense.
reason. It's the fact that you can't apply filters to them the same way you would other visuals or text variables. You have to apply any of those filters in the measure that you're using as a text variable. And then this is so pedantic, but the fact that
Yep.
semi-light and semi-bold font weights for Sego UI, you have them in all other visuals except text boxes. I don't know why. It drives
That's
me nuts.
interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Those are not things that I knew about, but that's very interesting.
Just because I can't find a reason for it. I can't think of like a performance concern that would come from having,
Right.
Sego UI semi-bold, but it's just not there.
That's interesting. Maybe submit it as a Fabric idea to get that fixed.
Yeah, I'm gonna be submitting that this afternoon.
Yeah. Um, and then lastly, there's way too many social media networks. Where can people find you? Is there anything you want to promote? Any cool projects or anything you're involved with?
I am on LinkedIn just as Evelyn Maxwell. If I have anything to promote in the future, that's where it's going to be.
Cool. Well, this has been great. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me, you too.